Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
All right, the Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, and joining you right on the heels of the SEC announcing the next two opponents on the Florida schedule. Of course, last week we got the 10-game, the announcement that that SEC was going to play conference only. 10-game SEC schedule. We've waited about a week now to try and figure out and get an announcement from the SEC of who the opponents would be, and pretty good, pretty equal there. Florida's going to draw Arkansas and Texas A&M for the 2020 season. So of course, storylines galore there, of course. Arkansas with Feleipe Franks transferring to Arkansas, and if he's a starting quarterback, which more than likely he will be, and he probably should be, he'll return to the swamp and play his former team, the Gators. So, man, that would be awesome for the entire fan base and the 90,000 fans that, could fit in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. That one would be a fun one to go to. And of course, no hard feelings, of course, towards Feleipe Franks or anything for transferring and everything he did for the University of Florida. Kyle Trask is the quarterback now, so it would have been fun to see the Kyle Trask versus Feleipe Franks matchup with 90,000 fans in the stands there. So we'll get it, hopefully. The season will be played, but that's going to be one of the bigger storylines, no matter how good Arkansas is this season. When that game, we'll look, and next week we'll get, hopefully, I would assume next week we'll get the layout. We already know who home and away is for the whole schedule. We just don't know how it's going to line up as far as who you play and what week there. So, and then of course the other one, Texas A&M. Florida was scheduled to play Texas A&M in 2 years, and Alabama next year. Texas A&M the year after that. We're going to travel to Texas A&M in 2 years. That we don't know if that game's still going to be on schedule or not, but there we go. Florida, Texas A&M. Florida traveling to Texas A&M, and a lot of people picking Texas A&M to be one of the up-and-comer surprise teams in the West, I think, this year. Not Alabama, of course. Phil still has them high. I think Texas A&M is 5th in his poll, in his magazine that came out. So I think he had Alabama in the playoffs still. But Texas A&M ranked 5th in Phil Steele's magazine. So, pretty good. I think some balance there for Florida. You get an easier opponent, and Sam Pittman, of course, is going to Arkansas, the Georgia offensive line coach from the last few years, and he's the head coach there now at Arkansas with Feleipe Franks at quarterback. So pretty good storylines there for Arkansas. And then, like I said, Texas A&M getting talked up as a team to watch in the SEC this coming up year, and Florida is going to go and travel. Hey, take on Jimbo Fisher, again, former Florida State head coach as well. So he had a lot of success against the Gators as the Seminoles head coach. But look, another storyline there, it's the quarterback storyline. You have, Kyle Trask and Feleipe Franks. That's going to garner a whole lot of storylines. But Kyle Trask and Kellen Mond, a lot of people want to nitpick which quarterback is the best in the SEC, and it's mostly between those two guys, Mond and Trask. So, good for Florida. They don't. Believe me, we'd love to have 90,000 fans when LSU comes into town and the like. Good thing for Florida, but Texas is a little different out there. They kind of want to open up things too as well. So I think the last report I remember seeing from the state of Texas is maybe 50% of fans there. So you're looking at 50,000 there for Texas A&M if that's allowed. So. I think all in all, and I'll go through, look, I'm flying by the seat of my pants here a little bit. I'm joining you live for an instant reaction. The schedule just got announced 30 minutes ago. So I'm going to try and catch up with Twitter, get some of your guys' thoughts here. But I'll go through the rest of the SEC as well and how home and away shakes out. Because, of course, that's going to play a part a bit. Home field advantage is not going to be the same home field advantage we're used to. If we have a season this season, the stands are not going to be full. So will there be some type of home field advantage? Yes, there will be. You don't have to travel. And in this climate right now, that's probably a big deal. right now. We don't know travel protocols for a lot of these teams right now, and I know the SEC just announced today as well their testing protocols and all that. You can go find that, but I do think it's worth noting home field advantage might be just because you don't have to travel, and just the travel protocol is going to be so weird this year. Of you're going to get tested what 3 times a week, not 2-3 times a week now. I would imagine airports are what want people. I know you get a chartered flight and stuff, but airports may have a say as well in testing protocols and checking fevers and all that kind of stuff. So, I think there's a lot more information we need to know about visiting teams and a protocol there that they have to follow. So I think there is some home field advantage kind of baked in, not necessarily on game day, on the field, 90,000, 100% of the crowd screaming in your ear. It might just be more because of the travel and all that. So before we get there, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Check us out on all the podcast platforms out there: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, live on YouTube right now. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. Hit the like button. As I'm joining you here right on the heels of the SEC announcing the SEC schedule here. So let's go through, of course, for the Gators. As I said, Arkansas at home, Texas A&M on the road. So Florida's home opponents this year. Does it really change all that much? Of course, there's no reason for it to change. But Kentucky, LSU, Missouri, South Carolina, and now Arkansas at home. There's the 5 home games. And then away from the swamp, Georgia and Jacksonville still. And then Ole Miss, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and traveling to Texas A&M now. So, and go through and let me make sure I can keep up with everything here. But let's start. We'll start with the SEC East and how the schedule broke out for SEC East teams. So for Florida, of course, you kept LSU, you kept Ole Miss, you added Arkansas, and you added Texas A&M. For Georgia, already had Auburn and Alabama on the schedule. We've talked at months about that Georgia schedule, how it's going to be tougher for them than Florida this year by the schedule itself, by adding Alabama. So they had Auburn, they had Alabama. Florida had a little bit of a break with LSU and Ole Miss, to give Georgia kind of a not easier path, but to make it fair, to make it equal there. They add Mississippi State, and they play Arkansas as well. So Feleipe Franks will play Georgia again. Didn't get to play him last year, of course, because he was injured, but did get to play him a couple times already in his career. He'll get to play the Bulldogs one more time. So Georgia gets Mississippi State at home and Arkansas on the road. Kentucky here. Kentucky already had Mississippi State, and they already had Auburn. They add Ole Miss, and Kentucky adds Alabama. So Kentucky, if you're looking for maybe a team that's not Florida, that's not Georgia, that could represent the SEC East, Kentucky's one of those teams you could look at. And, if this schedule somehow would have gotten tougher for Florida and tougher for Georgia, maybe Kentucky could have snuck in through the back door there and snuck into Atlanta. But with them adding Alabama, that's going to make that a little bit difficult. So Kentucky with Mississippi State and with Auburn, and then they added Ole Miss and then added Alabama. Missouri. Oof. Missouri got it tough. Missouri got it tough here. Already had Arkansas and Mississippi State at home, but Missouri has to add Alabama and LSU. So the top 2 teams in the West, that's who Missouri added. And Eli Drinkwitz, the new head coach there at Missouri in his first season in this revised schedule, now draws Alabama and now draws LSU. They get Alabama at home and LSU on the road. South Carolina already had a tough schedule as well. They play Texas A&M every year. They drew Arkansas this year. So they play Texas A&M at home, LSU on the road. They added, for their 2 games, Auburn at home and Ole Miss on the road. Tennessee already has Alabama and Arkansas scheduled, of course. And then they added Texas A&M and Auburn. So Tennessee's schedule gets tougher too. I just mentioned Kentucky as a team. If it wasn't Florida, if it wasn't Georgia, and maybe a team that could sneak in. Not everybody, but a lot of people's picking Tennessee based off of last year's end of season run. As can they break through again? Is this we've heard it a lot during the Butch Jones years. Would this be? Is this another year where previous year they had a really streaky hot end to the season, and now a lot of people kind of picking up on Tennessee again? Well, A lot of people doing it at the end this year, but their schedule gets tougher by adding Texas A&M and adding Auburn. They host Texas A&M and will travel to Auburn. And then Vanderbilt already had Ole Miss and Texas A&M on the schedule. They added LSU and Mississippi State. So I'll go through the West here. If you could keep up, you could probably put the schedule together in your head there a bit. But I will go through here. Alabama already has Georgia and Tennessee on the schedule. They added Kentucky and will travel to Missouri. Arkansas, Tennessee, and Missouri on the schedule. As I mentioned, Arkansas added Florida and they added Georgia. Auburn, Kentucky, and Georgia on the schedule already. They drew Tennessee and they drew South Carolina. So Auburn's schedule's not too tough there. I mean, if you look at their East opponents here, Auburn, Georgia. Georgia's the only game right now they'd probably not be favored in. But they'd be favored over Kentucky. They'd be favored over Tennessee more than likely. They'll be favored over South Carolina. So if Auburn's kind of the same team we expect them to be, kind of based on last year a bit. I know they lost. They lost a lot on defense. That defensive front pretty much gone, and can Bo Nix take that next step? But just on the surface here, you'd say Georgia's the only team that you'd have them at as an underdog right now. So LSU already had South Carolina and Florida, of course, on the schedule. They added Missouri and Vanderbilt. So LSU, I think, probably added the West contenders by having South Carolina and Florida. By having South Carolina, they had South Carolina, Alabama had Tennessee. So LSU had Florida, Alabama had Georgia. And at the same time, Alabama added Kentucky and Missouri. LSU added Missouri and Vanderbilt. So I think, LSU got the easier end of the deal there. Look, Alabama's not losing to Kentucky and Missouri, so it doesn't really matter. But just looking at it on the surface there, I think LSU got it a little bit easier than Alabama. Ole Miss, let's say, they, of course, already had Florida on the schedule at home. They had Vanderbilt on the schedule as well. That's their permanent crossover. They added South Carolina. They added Kentucky. Mississippi State already had Missouri and Kentucky on the schedule. They added Vanderbilt and Georgia. And Texas A&M already had Vanderbilt and South Carolina on the schedule. And they added Florida and Tennessee. So Texas A&M schedule gets a bit tougher there. Vanderbilt, South Carolina already on the schedule. They add Florida and they add Tennessee. So, man, that's going to set up for a fun season. You guys have known, if you've listened to Gators Breakdown, I'm not a big easy cupcake game fan all too much. They're necessary. All those schools little schools need help. But I've been a proponent for a 9-10 game SEC schedule anyway. And 2 big out of conferences with FSU already, and then and another one there. So maybe add 3 if you get a 9-conference game. So look, having 10 SEC games is gonna be fun. I wish more fans could be in the stands. We'll let all that play out, and hopefully at some point a lot of fans will be. But for Florida right now, the home schedule of Kentucky, LSU, Missouri, South Carolina, and Arkansas with the Feleipe Franks storyline, and then going to A&M and Jimbo. Of course, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Georgia, and Jacksonville. That's a fun season. That's going to be a really fun season there when you look at it in these 10 SEC games. I do think for Florida, everybody wants to kind of, of course, you're going to compare schedules, and you're going to compare schedules to Georgia just because we thought Florida would have a break this year. And how I would like to see the process with this. I got Feinbaum off on the side here. I don't know if he's talking to Greg Sankey or anybody like that, but maybe we'll get more info on Monday about how they came up with this. From what I heard, going into when the SEC announced that they were going to release the schedule on Friday, yes, at 6 o'clock, Twitter went crazy. Hey, SEC Network, tune in at 6 o'clock. You're gonna get the schedule. So I started checking around. Of course, maybe it would leak somewhere pretty early, or try and get a sense of what the schedule would be. But one thing I did find out was the schools wouldn't find out until today, and they wouldn't find out till about 15 minutes before everybody else did. They would get the schedule. Saw that in a couple different places there. So, did schools have any say at all in how the schedule came out? Because of course, the rumors of Florida having to play Alabama and Texas A&M, and neither Florida nor Alabama really liking that too much. So did they through back channels go and get their way or anything like that. Look, it was said last week. Ross Dellinger for Sports Illustrated, he said he was spitballing the idea of the next two opponents. It was just an idea. When the SEC announced that they were going to play 10 games, they said almost pretty much right away that it was going to be based on some strength of schedule format. The whole next two games thing never materialized to my knowledge. And so then fast forward a week to today on Friday, and SEC said they're going to announce the schedule at 6 o'clock. And from everything I could gather, the teams wouldn't find out until today as well. So we'll see if that's the truth or not. I don't know. I'll try and do some more digging, but that was kind of what was leaking out around 5 o'clock. That the teams didn't even know. So we'll see. Maybe Florida, Alabama somehow knew they were going to play each other and moaned a little bit to get their way of not having to play each other. But I do think it was more about some equality here. So while Florida had LSU and Ole Miss, they gave Florida another somewhat tough opponent in Texas A&M and a somewhat easier opponent in Arkansas. Since Georgia already had Auburn and Alabama on the schedule, they give them a little bit two easier opponents with Arkansas and Mississippi State. Like I said, I think Missouri, of course, drew the tough part of the schedule here in the way it worked out with Alabama and LSU. And as I said, I think Tennessee's chances hurt a bit too with Texas A&M and Auburn. So if they can take that next step, they'll be competitive in those games. And I think they beat Auburn just a couple years ago when they matched up. So it's a big win, I think, in Jeremy Pruitt's first year. So those two teams playing pretty recent. And Florida, for Florida and Arkansas, Texas A&M. Florida last played Arkansas 2016, the week after Florida, Georgia, and just went and got their brains beat in by Arkansas that year, and then played Texas A&M in 2017. Feleipe Franks with a big run in that game in his ugly swamp green uniforms, and pretty disappointing loss there to Texas A&M the last time they come to the swamp there. So that was the last two matchups, I believe. 2016 for Arkansas and 2017 for Texas A&M. So some recent history there with those SEC teams. So, of course, you get my instant reaction here. I like the schedule. I think it's pretty fair. I think it's pretty fair for Florida and Georgia. I don't think any team can necessarily look at the schedule and sit here and say they were at a disadvantage. Now, before I get too far on that, we'll see, hopefully next week, how the schedule lines up. I mean, does Florida somehow play LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M back to back to back or something like that? And maybe there's some inequality there. If one team has to go, there's going to be a tough stretch somewhere. There always is. Like last year, Florida had to do Auburn and LSU back to back. So tough stretch there in back to back 2 games. But that's what we'll have to look for now is the schedule format. Who do you play? Where does the bye week come into play? And that part of it. That part of it will be huge now. I said on the surface, the games themselves, Florida and Georgia, it's pretty equal. And neither team will be able to point to the schedule and say we played a harder schedule. Now maybe by season's end we'll say that. Maybe Texas A&M is much better or much worse than we think. And Georgia plays Auburn. Maybe Auburn's much better or much worse than we think. Or maybe Georgia plays Mississippi State here, and Mike Leach comes in and lights the world on fire in year one. So I do think, and look, that's the type of offense we don't see in the SEC too much with Mike Leach and that whole air raid and pretty much throw it almost every play of the game. It's kind of new. LSU did some of that last year, but they still ran the ball a good bit with some power run game. And Mississippi State has the talent to do that too. So it will be interesting to see how Mike Leach adapts to that talent there. But not a lot of Mike Leach. There's plenty of tape out there for Georgia to watch on Mike Leach and KJ Costello coming over as a transfer to quarterback there for him. So. We'll see how it all breaks out. Arkansas, I don't think it's going to be too much this year with Sam Pittman and his first year head coaching there. I don't think Feleipe Franks is a good enough quarterback to elevate their play all that much. They got some good options at receiver there, but Florida having to play Arkansas, not too much of a worry there. And look, they're going to know it's in a different offense, of course. I think Arkansas were trying to adapt to what Feleipe Franks can do well. Dan Mullen and Todd Grantham know what he can do well. They played him in practice. They know his tendencies a bit. So they probably know how to rattle Feleipe Franks a bit. They know what rattles him. They know what gets under his skin. But Arkansas doesn't necessarily have the talent or coaching ability to hang with Florida. But there's going to be a lot of emotion. They'll play with a lot of emotion, I'm sure, for Feleipe Franks coming back there. But as I said, Florida already had LSU on the road at Ole Miss, home with Arkansas, and on the road at Texas A&M. So let's get your thoughts here added here. I'll go through as best I can. Hopefully not a lot of cussing or anything. I'll have to come through here as I'm kind of live reading and going through at the same time. Josh Emery at MMA Josh says, love Franks coming to Gainesville. I hope we're friendly hostile, but give him respect too. Excuse me. So, yeah, there's not going to be fans in the stands. So that's one thing, as I mentioned earlier. So going there, going with that part of it, it's not going to be too much of a hostile crowd for Feleipe Franks there. So Bull Gator says big winners LSU. Definitely mentioned that earlier. Big loser is Mizzou. Let's see. Rob Coe at Muscle Plug 54 says, I'm good because we expect to play Bama in Atlanta. And that's, I did throw up a funny tweet when it was rumored that Florida might play Alabama in the way it was lining up. Hey, you want to go play Alabama twice? Yeah, there we go. Let's do that. So that was a good part of the back and forth and having a little bit of fun with the whole aspect. But yeah, we, as Gator fans, with coming up with this 2020 season, expect to play Alabama in Atlanta. Since we play LSU in the season, and LSU loses a whole lot as well. Not a lot of people see LSU repeating as SEC West champs, so a lot of people are looking towards Florida and Alabama in Atlanta. So Florida won't have to play Alabama twice, and we'll hopefully get to play them in Atlanta at the end of the season here. So in Mullen We Trust at Gator Gorl says A&M without any fans is an early Christmas present. Arkansas is a good one as well. Yeah, I mean, A&M's got really good home field advantage that they packed there. Everybody remembers you go back to the 2012 game and Johnny Manziel's first game and Kevin Sumlin's first game. Was it his first game? I think it was his first game too, if I remember right. And A&M's first game in the Big 12 or in the SEC coming over from the Big 12. That's the last time Florida played there. A big storyline there. So advise you there, if you haven't watched that game before, go back on YouTube and watch that 2012 Florida versus Texas A&M game. Johnny Manziel goes crazy in the first half. Will Muschamp and that Gator defense goes in at halftime and shuts down Johnny Manziel in the second half, and some really good offense. And Mike Gillisley and Jeff Driscoll leading the way in the second half there on offense for the Gators. So if you haven't watched that, go back and you get a little taste of what the Gators will be walking into, but probably with not the same hostile crowd there. So John Rosado at Utah Gator says, Utah Gator 725 says, Trask versus Mon and Franks, sign me up. Let's see. Chips and Queso says, I love it. The Feleipe storyline is fun, and A&M is a nice addition to the schedule. Good challenge. Jess Best 05 says, I'm so excited to play Franks. That'll be an interesting storyline. Worried about A&M a little bit, and that is it. I mean, A&M's the game you have to worry about in this scenario. This is the one that makes the schedule a little more difficult. I think as I said earlier, to equal out what Georgia had in Alabama and Auburn. So you add A&M, as I said, a team many you're picking to be a team in the West to contend, and a good team. The Trask Mon storyline there, and they've recruited pretty good. I do think, so far, and I got in a lot of trouble with this not long ago on Twitter. Has there really been that much of a difference between Jimbo Fisher and Kevin Sumlin so far? I haven't seen it necessarily. When you're looking at Texas A&M and how they perform, they're recruiting better. And so more than likely it pays dividends down the road. But so far, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Brett Ciencia on when he joined the podcast from Pick Six Previews, that it's not that big of a difference between Texas A&M then and now, but the recruiting would eventually have to pay off, and they'll be better. So This is a year a lot of people are pointing to for Kellen Mond to take a big step, and they got some young talent there. I think they'll try hopefully, or not hopefully against the Gators, but their hope is they take advantage of it. Jenna R. Brantley says, love it. Kyle Field is incredible and definitely an away game I won't miss. Matchup against Jimbo is going to be great football. Jenna, I hope you can make that trip. I hope that's another aspect of this. Or what does away fans look like? Do away fans even get a chance to travel to an away game, or you have to buy tickets from the home fans with tickets at a premium this year? That's going to be an interesting part of it too. Is how many away fans can actually attend games. So we'll see what the SEC's announcements are on that and how many tickets teams have to give up for away teams. As well. Real Kevin, let's see here. Kevin Maurer BB, we'll see. Hopefully I got that right. He says, balanced, one tough, one easy. It's fair. D. Pennington, 1985, Franks versus Trask, great storyline. Also love to get another shot at Jimbo. And that's it, too. We, as Gator fans, got tired of Jimbo and Dalvin Cook and Jameis Winston. Florida was not as good in those years. Florida was nowhere near as good as they are now when Jimbo was at FSU, and still gave those FSU teams trouble a bit. Florida had some good defenses under Will Muschamp and Jim McElwain, and gave those FSU teams a little bit of trouble in first half of games until FSU just out talented and out athleted and out coached Florida for a whole game scenario. So yeah, it would be nice to get back at Jimbo a little bit for all the heartbreak and pounding that he gave Florida his time at Florida State. So JB White says at Rattler Gator says LSU and Georgia got big breaks. Like I said, the Georgia break, I understand, but already having Alabama and Auburn on the schedule, this was a way to kind of equal it out, I think, for Florida and Georgia. Here we go. And then, look, this is a way to look at it, too. At Derek, Derrike, expectation still playoffs. And I don't think the schedule does anything to change your expectation for Florida. If it does, reply somewhere along the way. Reply in the tweet or in the YouTube comments or something. To me, this doesn't change all that much. The expectations for Florida. It's still going to come down to the Georgia game in Jacksonville, more than likely, with this, because I said this schedule had a way of working itself out to where it's pretty fair. So it's going to come down to the Florida-Georgia game. And a lot of people were giving Florida a little bit of a pad the way the schedule was before with LSU and Ole Miss and Georgia having to play Auburn and Alabama. The hope there was maybe Georgia loses to both those teams, and the game in Jacksonville wasn't as imperative as maybe need to win that game. But look, you want to beat Georgia anyway. And now I think the schedule is pretty equal to where it's going to come down to that game. You've got to win that game to go to Atlanta, and that's what this schedule does. So I don't think the expectations change. I don't think, if you look at it, you sit here and say Florida has two tough games with LSU and A&M and two easier games. Georgia has two tough games with Alabama and Auburn and two easier games with Mississippi State and Arkansas. So the expectation I don't think your expectation of Florida should change at all with this schedule. The thing is, with a 10-game SEC schedule makes it more difficult. I mean, look, A&M is one more tougher team on Florida's schedule. That wasn't there before. So I do think with the way college football goes this year, if you're in a 2-loss SEC team and you win the SEC championship game, you're still going to be in. There's no way with a 10-game SEC schedule you lose two games and you're not in the playoff. I'm sorry, there's no way a 2-loss SEC team with a 10-game SEC schedule should be in, and more than likely, to me, will be in. There's no question about that. So, can Florida afford to lose to A&M and, say, LSU, or A&M and, an East team, not Georgia, or something like that? So, like I said, going back kind of to the original point, I don't think your expectation of Florida should change by the addition of Arkansas and Texas A&M. Jason Levon Carter says, I actually kind of expected these two teams for some reason. I'm not an expert, but I didn't expect Bama and Auburn to be added, but I'm excited about these two matchups. Yeah, Auburn was probably one of the last teams I expected, just because Florida played them last year, and I don't think they were going to do that again. So Auburn was kind of off the table for me too. I thought it would be Alabama or Texas A&M. It was definitely Texas A&M. I didn't think it was going to be both. Like I said, I think a lot of people jumped the gun on that thought of it being the next two opponents, and I think Florida, was going to end up with Alabama or Auburn or Alabama and Texas A&M to kind of beef up the schedule a bit. And then I thought Mississippi State or Arkansas. So it worked out pretty much the way I thought it would too. And kind of Trey Abney says that too. If I couldn't have Arkansas and Mississippi State, this was my second choice. So absolutely kind of going back there. Ali Feleipe Franks coming back for a strange homecoming. Would rather have Texas A&M at home. This is Radius of Convergence. Would rather have Texas A&M at home and the Hogs on the road, but overall it's not too bad. Maybe in a normal year, but this isn't a normal year, so Florida going to A&M is not that big of a deal to me, and I do like I love the storyline of Feleipe Franks coming back to Gainesville. That's as I said, will be a major headline in the SEC and college football. And Ozzie Canseco brings up a good point right here with that. He says, just hope Franks isn't Brock Berlin 2.0. So, yeah, that would hurt too. You go back to 2003, and Brock Berlin lost the job to Rex Grossman, and then transfers to Miami. Florida travels down to Miami and gets up big on the Hurricanes, and Brock Berlin leads a furious comeback there for the Hurricanes. So definitely, Ozzie, I don't want that to happen either. Don't want Feleipe Franks to come in here into the swamp and end up beating his former team there. So yeah, there we and then Andrew G says right here, the last thought on Twitter, it says hopefully we get a chance to give Franks a standing ovation. During warm-ups or something like that, if there's enough fans in the stands, he will be, and probably some point in the game as well. I think fans will kind of show their gratitude and for what he did and what he meant to the University of Florida for helping lead the transition from Jim McElwain to Dan Mullen. Your quarterback has to buy in for the rest of the team to buy in, and I think Feleipe Franks did that, and is a big part of why we get to enjoy Gator football, and a big part of why we are looking at Florida as a big team in 2020, because they had a really good 2018 with Feleipe Franks at quarterback, and then had a really good 2019 with Kyle Trask at quarterback. So you can go back 2 years ago, and Franks was a big part in why a lot of people feel good about Florida 2 years later. So there we go. A lot. That was a quick, not too quick, kind of instant reaction there. We'll have more next week, of course. Hopefully, I don't know when I'll do a show next week. Did 2 this week. I knew this would come out this week at some point. We'll try and see next week. May do like we did this past week when I recorded on a Wednesday, but kind of going to maybe see when the SEC. I do think, as I said, the week-by-week schedule will be announced. Hopefully at some point next week. So we'll see when Florida gets to play these teams. And hopefully there's just no gauntlet that you have. There's going to be one. Hopefully there's not a couple. There's always one gauntlet out there that you have to go through at some point in the year. Hopefully it's not a 3-4 game gauntlet, and maybe it's 2-3 at the most, or there's 2 games here, 2 games there, 2 games there, something like that. We'll see how it all works out there, and maybe where the bye week is too. But as I was saying, pretty fair in the end for everybody involved, and I was trying to go through maybe some YouTube comments here as well. You guys live, just throwing your comments there, but it's kind of hard to go back there. Kenneth Robinson says, you think the schedule going to help with recruiting? That I don't know. You get Arkansas at home, so I don't think that that's really that big of a deal. The recruits want to come to that game or not. We don't even know if recruits can come on campus at any point in the fall right now. So games themselves, I think it's still a wait and see. If fans are going to be, or not fans, recruits will be allowed in the stands and all that. So that's kind of where we'll go from there. Bruce Eklund asks, is next show a recruiting update? Absolutely, it will be. I know Leonard Taylor committed to Miami yesterday, but the Palmetto Corey Collier's safety will commit Monday, August 10th. So we'll have that to look back look back on as well. Jason Marshall still hanging out there too. Florida, Miami, Alabama. We'll see where he goes from there. So if he commits, we'll have that update there as well. But we'll definitely have more schedule talk. Will Miles would join me at some point. We'll see. Hopefully, we'll probably try and wait till Wednesday at the latest. Wednesday night at the latest for the next episode. Hopefully, we'll try and see where the SEC puts these games on the schedule. And let's see. I'll try and go through some here. As far as the comments, and I don't really want you to have to wait around for me to find the comments worth reading. And I really can't read them fast enough to get them out there, but got to do a better job of keeping up with the YouTube comments. But thanks for you guys. The chat and YouTube is always on fire. So everybody who joins the YouTube part of it, everybody give me a like there. But encourage everybody else to hop in on the YouTube portion of it as well. So you can interact with some fellow Gator fans. Last week, some Miami Hurricane fans jumped in. We'll get Georgia fans every now and then. So if you don't have a YouTube, Google account already, go create one. Come in, watch us live. That always helps, and interact with a whole lot of Gator fans there. Over about 120 watching live right now. So thank you much for joining us for this impromptu episode of Gators Breakdown. I knew I was going to do one right away as soon as the SEC's announced these 10 games and then the two opponents that we didn't necessarily know about until today. So wasn't going to leave you guys hanging too long without an episode and my thoughts on adding Texas A&M and Arkansas to the schedule. So that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.